I want you to imagine something for a second. What happens when the one thing that makes you the best, your skill, your courage, your pure aggression, what happens when that suddenly becomes completely and totally irrelevant? Just picture it. You're one of the most elite fighter pilots on the planet, you're up at 25,000 feet, and you have this sudden, chilling realization that the war you think you're fighting is already over. Not because you've been outfought, no, but because you've been outcalculated. So this is what a German ace named Heinz Knoke actually saw on an afternoon in August of 1943. And that quote, it's not just some poetic description. It's probably the most literal, accurate way to describe an impossible reality. This wasn't just a formation of airplanes. He described it as a geological event, a moving continent of polished metal, absolutely bristling with machine guns, so huge it literally blotted out the sun. In that single moment, all that passion of the hunter stuff just froze in his veins. He wasn't looking at a target anymore. He was looking at his own extinction.
And here is why. Let's put some cold, hard numbers to that feeling of pure dread. On that specific day, the entire German defense could only get 40 fighters into the air to meet that silver glacier. And the glacier itself? It was made of 376 B-17 flying fortresses. I mean, just do the math. That's nearly 10 bombers for every single German fighter. This wasn't a battle. It was a math problem, and it was basically designed to mock the very idea that one person's bravery could ever make a difference.
So, what do you do, right? When you're faced with a problem that you just can't solve, how do you even begin to fight back? Well, for the pilots of the Luftwaffe, the only answer was to lean into the one thing they had left, this brutal, desperate, but incredibly skilled ferocity that had once made them the absolute masters of the sky. Now, to really get what happens next, you have to understand who these men were. Their leader, Adolf Galland, he drilled this idea into their heads. They weren't defenders. No, they were predators. Their entire identity, their whole sense of self-worth, was built on the thrill of the hunt. And look, this mindset had conquered Europe. But what they were about to find out, in the most horrifying way possible, was that the math just didn't care about their passion. So their response was, well, it was brutally innovative. This wasn't just flying and shooting anymore. The same pilot who saw the glacier, Heinz Knoke, he started dropping bombs from his fighter onto the bomber formations. Other pilots started bolting these massive rockets under their wings, basically turning their planes into flying artillery to try and shatter those tight defensive formations from a distance. And then there was the ultimate act of desperation, the Sturmböcke, the battering ram fighters. These were heavily armored planes whose pilots were trained to fly directly into a wall of machine gun fire, get so close they couldn't possibly miss, and if all else failed, they were to ram the bomber right out of the sky. And you know what? For one brief, incredibly bloody moment, it actually looked like courage could beat the math. On a day the Americans would later call Black Thursday, these desperate tactics, they worked. The Luftwaffe tore into the bomber streams and they shot down 60 B-17s. 60! That is a catastrophic, unsustainable loss rate. It was so bad it actually forced the Americans to call off long-range bombing runs for months. In all the papers and the official reports, it was hailed as this monumental German victory. But here is the question, the one that really mattered, the one they were asking in the quiet ready rooms after all the celebrations died down. What's the real cost of a victory like that? Sure, the Americans lost 60 planes. They could build more. But Germany lost 38 fighters, and way more importantly, they lost the veteran aces who were flying them. We're talking about men with years of combat experience. You see, you can build a new airplane in a week. You cannot build a new ace. It was a victory, sure, but it was one that cost them everything. Because here's the thing, the fatal wound to the Luftwaffe wasn't actually being inflicted by the guns on those bombers. The real war, the one that mattered, was being lost far away from the front lines. It was a sickness in the system, a decay from the inside out, that was about to ground these hunters for good. Just look at this chart. Honestly, this tells you everything you need to know about a system that's completely collapsing. By 1944, a new American pilot would show up for his first mission with over 300 hours in a cockpit. He was a professional. His German opponent? Well, he was probably a teenager with barely 112 hours, who'd been rushed through a totally broken system. That's like sending someone who just got their learner's permit to go race in the Monaco Grand Prix. It's a disaster waiting to happen. And if those numbers seem cold, this quote from the ace Johannes Steinhoff, it just gives it a soul-crushing human face. Can you imagine being him? One of the best pilots in the world, and you have to watch these literal kids arrive at your squadron. You know they don't have the training. You know deep down that you're sending them to their deaths. And you have to stand there and watch as, mission after mission, they just don't come back. The Luftwaffe wasn't just losing planes anymore. It was feeding its own children into a furnace.
And then came the final logistical death blow. The Allied bombers, they switched their targets. They started going after Germany's synthetic fuel plants. And look at this timeline. In just 5 months, production fell by over 97%. The tragic irony here is that German factories were churning out these incredible, technologically advanced jet fighters, but they just sat on the airfields, silent, because there was no fuel to fly them. It got so bad, and this is true, ground crews were using teams of oxen to tow these advanced aircraft around just to save a few gallons of fuel. The world's most advanced air force completely grounded by an empty tank.
This all finally came to a head in an event that sounds like something out of a movie. In January of 1945, the greatest living heroes of Germany, guys like Galland and Steinhoff, they staged what's now known as the Fighter Pilots' Revolt. They went right to the head of the Luftwaffe and told him, to his face, "The war is lost. Our men are dying for nothing because you are incompetent." It was the ultimate breakdown, a mutiny born out of complete and total despair.
So, here's the crucial point to all of this. The skill of the German pilot, that was never the question. Their courage was never in doubt. But in this new kind of war, courage had become just a rounding error. This war wasn't being decided in the cockpit anymore. It was being won on the assembly line.
Just take a second and let these numbers sink in. In 1944, at the absolute peak of its war effort, Germany produced almost 40,000 aircraft. And let's be clear, that is a monumental feat of engineering. The problem? The United States alone built over 96,000. Germany wasn't in a fight, it was being buried under an avalanche of steel.
And if a number like 96,000 is just too big to wrap your head around, think about it like this. A single American factory, the Willow Run plant in Michigan, was rolling a brand new 4-engine heavy bomber off its assembly line every 63 minutes, 24 hours a day. Every single hour, another massive bomber. That factory was a weapon of war more powerful than any fighter squadron could ever hope to be.
Now let's zoom out to the global picture. Add in what the British and the Soviets were building. The Allies were building more than 4 planes for every single one that Germany produced. There's no tactic, no ace pilot, no secret weapon in the world that can overcome those kinds of odds. The war in the air had become a simple, brutal business of attrition. The outcome was a mathematical certainty long before the last plane was ever shot down. So what these German pilots went through, it wasn't just the trauma of losing a war. It was something so much more profound. They were the first-hand witnesses to the death of an entire era of warfare and the birth of a brand new one.
You know, I don't think it's possible to summarize this entire transformation more perfectly than Johannes Steinhoff does right here. Just listen to that progression again. From the apex predator of the skies to the desperate prey, to finally something that isn't even an animal anymore. Just a target, a data point in a much larger equation. That's the whole story, right there, in 3 devastating phases.
And this is the key takeaway, the big idea that changed everything: industrial warfare. The age of the individual hero, the knight of the air, it was over. It was replaced by the age of the factory floor, the supply chain, and the production quota. And why does this still matter to us today? Because this principle, that wars are won by the side with the overwhelming ability to produce and deploy technology and material, that is the absolute foundation of modern military power.
And that leaves us with a really profound and, frankly, a very uncomfortable question for our own time. When conflict becomes just a contest of production numbers and attrition rates, and human beings are just one more variable in the equation, how do we calculate the value of a single courageous life? It's a question that haunted the survivors of the Luftwaffe, and honestly, it's a question that echoes in every single conflict fought in the modern age.